All right, everyone, here's our solution. So I'm going to go through it one step at a time, each function, and show you what I do at the end, okay? So first, remember that we are going to have to use JSON. So we're going to go import JSON here and just keep that library of functions ready to go when we need to, dump and save information. First thing we wanted to do is see if we could build a function that will initialize our dictionary, that will check either load up a dictionary that currently exists or create a new one if it doesn't. So the first thing we do is we do an initialize recipes function. This doesn't have any parameters in it because we just want it to build something. We have a try and accept here. What it tries to do is it tries to load a recipe book that we have kind of like assumed we're going to be building. We're going to name it this. You can build this as some sort of variable if you wanted, like a string, but it's going to try and load this thing up. If it can't load this thing up, we're assuming at the moment that the recipe dictionary doesn't exist, and therefore create an empty recipe dictionary and then return that at the end of the function. So there's like a couple of logical flaws in this, like, maybe the recipe book does exist, but it doesn't exist in this file path. So you might want to add a file path parameter here or something to that effect. But, essentially this is what we're looking for in terms of creating a dictionary if one doesn't exist. And if it does exist, load it up with JSON. The next thing we want to do is the add recipes function. So we assume that we have a dictionary, either empty or has recipes, and we have the syntax that we want for our dictionary. Remember what it was? It was here's a dictionary, recipe name. Let's put that wrap that in quotes. Recipe name, and then it is an embedded dictionary. Here we go with ingredient and some value. I'll put 120, and then so on. Let's say ingredient A, ingredient B, and 15, 20. Whatever. But that's basically the syntax, and then we comma, and then we want the next recipe. So in order to do that, if we want to add recipe to a dictionary, we should pass it the recipe that already exists. And I initialized a couple of variables here. Well, I initialized one variable because first we're going to have to get input from our person as to what they want the recipe to be. Okay, so first we're going to have a while loop, which is while name equals none. So while we haven't named the recipe, we're going to try this input where we because this is a string, thankfully we don't have to do any weird try and accept, but we do put a try and accept in here just in case they put in some weird information. So first we give it a name. If this works, then it'll pass the name into the recipe dictionary, and then this while loop will break. And then it'll go on to the next set of code, which is ingredient. So I have this thing called ingredient check equals no. So we have another while loop here. It's kind of like a different way of looking at this kind of problem. So now what we're going to do is ask them to input an ingredient name, the volume of the ingredient, and then we're going to pass all that information into our recipe book. And then otherwise, if that fails for any reason, I'm just assuming right now that they didn't put in an alphanumeric in some way, shape, or form, but this error could be a couple of other things. But we do have a try and accept that we can at least catch that kind of stuff. And then lastly, we ask the person, are there any more ingredients? So they have to put yes or no. Well, they could put anything, but the one that we're looking for is no. So basically, if they put yes or like 12 or whatever, it will ask them for any more ingredients. So maybe we can add a little bit more logic to this to include that. So in this case, though, we're not doing that, and that's a better thing to do to make your script more comprehensive and to more robust to errors. But this is actually basically doing what we want it to, so at least you get an idea of how you can build that. Maybe you guys can think of other logic that you can use that, okay, if ingredient check is yes or no. Well, we could do two while loops or one while loop with a bunch of if statements, or two if statements, if yes and then if no, and then have this be some sort of other parameter, or if, elif, and an else. You know, there's a couple of different ways that you can approach this. I just did it this way, okay? It might not be the best, but you guys might think of something better. I can think of like 2 or 3 at the top of my head, but it's better to just show you this as a possible answer, and this is a totally satisfactory answer, okay? And then once you're done adding a recipe to the dictionary, you then pass the recipe back up to through the function. Okay. Then lastly, we have our save function. So this is a simple one. I'm just having it print what it's going to be saved as, and then we use our .dumps command and pass through this, pass it through an object, or pass it through the through an open command, which will create a file and write the output to it. So then in order to get this to work, all we're going to do is, like, I just want you to initialize these, run each of these functions once, and that's it, okay? So in this case, we initialize our dictionary if it exists. If it doesn't exist, we create an empty one. This will, if we run this, we'll try and add a recipe to the dictionary, and then it'll save the output. Let's see if it runs. It's loading. Just give it a second, guys. Hey everyone, okay, my Jupyter Notebook just like really quickly crashed, and while I was resetting things up, I quickly noticed that there was a slight error in the previous code that I had. This should have been no from the get-go. It should be an empty string. And lastly, I forgot to, this said json.dumps without the dictionary in it. It's actually json.dump, and with the and I forgot to include the dictionary in there. So in order for it to save, it needs to know what it's saving. So it's important to have that. And that was a little typo with the dumps. Actually is a different function that does a slightly different thing, and I know it's confusing, so don't get too bogged down in it. And then, so let's run this and see how this all works. So, name of recipe, cake. We have ingredient name, egg. We want 12 eggs in there. Any more ingredients? Yeah, sure. Let's put yes. Please input an ingredient name. Let's put in flour. And, you know, okay, well, there's 12 eggs in here. It's like 36. It's a massive cake. So making a bunch of cakes for, you know, this is a recipe for a store or something, a bakery. Let's put car. See how I built the logic, right? So anything but no is going to ask you for more ingredients. So you can make a more nuanced logic loop for yours, guys. You can put an ingredient here, flour. Let's put sugar. And, you know, let's say 20 cups of sugar. Lastly, any more ingredients? No. And look at that. It saves it to wherever our Jupyter Notebooks are being rendered at the moment. Okay, guys, there's a problem answer for you. You can do more extensive. You can probably do a little less extensive than I did. But regardless, that basically covers all the criteria I was wanting for you. And, you know, covers a bunch of different things that you can do with your code. So catch you in the next chapter.